Uganda. So, Monica, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Krisha. Thank you, everybody who has managed to make time to join us today. My name is Monica Kyamazima from Uganda. That is in East Africa, where EverFree has a field site that provides aftercare services for victims of trafficking. Basically, what we do is we identify victims in need of support and support them through that process of rehabilitation and healing. And we do this through a number of programming or services, mainly shelter life, giving them physical protection and aftercare, psychosocial support, counseling, medical support to help them, rehabilitate their bodies and minds, and then preparing or empowering them to re-enter the community as vibrant members of community. I got interested in this work sort of by accident, I would say. My background is in finance. I worked in the institutions for maybe about 8 years before I met EverFree's co-founder, Kelsey. Completely by accident, we stumbled into a workshop on human trafficking for judges, and nothing was ever the same for me after that. I knew immediately that I had to get involved and do my bit in supporting victims of trafficking. While I knew that trafficking does happen, I knew what human trafficking is, I had never really thought about it being this close to home, this within our society and in the communities where we live and work every day. So seeing that fresh perspective changed a lot for me personally. I am a mother of two, and I can't imagine some of the things that we've seen over the years happening to a child. So yeah, that's how I got started. We walked up to Kelsey, my colleague and I, and we told her, you have to let us help you. We don't care if you want us to file documents for you. We have to do something that translates into helping the people that you work with. And so we developed a program that initially we used to do it at our law firm. I'm an advocate, a lawyer by profession. We used to do it as our pro bono bit at the law firm, and the program kept growing and growing until one of us had to, come and do it full time. Yeah, so that's how we met, and that's how we started doing this work. It was a legal program. We called it the Victim Counsel Program, where we provided free legal services to victims of trafficking to help in or to facilitate their rehabilitation. In our opinion, we thought for a survivor of trafficking to fully, immerse themselves in their restoration and in their healing process, the legal aspects of the problem needed to be addressed. They have issues, for example, with the debts that, led to exploitation or domestic issues, or even, prosecution and investigation of the case in which they're involved. And so we began a program where we would go with victims to court, represent them pro bono, give them advice, and more it was really appreciated. And so the program grew not just within our organization, but also across the space nationally. And now we have a fully fledged victim counsel program that has been implemented and embraced by the authorities and prosecution. And yeah, that's how I got started in this work. And then, well, I guess over the years, I got more interested in the programming bit of the work, and here we are today. Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing. Actually, like I remember some of that from when I first met you, when you
Yeah,
visited my law school, and I was a student attorney with the Human Rights Clinic. And
yeah.
so you and Kelsey are actually and you guys are responsible for getting me into EverFree. Just hearing
Oh,
about the work and first getting to work with you all, it was amazing. So we're starting a chain of inspiration here. I love it.
yes, we are.
Yeah.
Mm,
So thank you so much for that. That's really a great overview of how everything kind of came into place and just the passion that's driving this work. That's wonderful. And I guess you touched a bit on, how there has historically been a need that survivors have had for this sort of work. Can you tell us in a sort of overview about trafficking in Uganda and help us understand what it looks like and the main types of trafficking that you see?
mm. Yes, trafficking has taken the center stage in our communities in the recent years. And I think most of that is attributable to the fact that the anti-trafficking movement or organizations within this anti-trafficking space have done a lot of work in sensitizing, in creating awareness about the problem. One of the unique things about Uganda is we have had the anti-trafficking law on our books for more than 10 years now, roughly 11 years, but we've only begun to see real change or a lot of work building momentum within the space in the last maybe 5 years. Before that, basically, we used to, yes, we've identified victims who are having a problem, and many times it was misclassified either as gender-based violence or as a domestic dispute or a labor dispute, but it hadn't been, properly categorized as trafficking in persons. So the most common forms of trafficking or exploitation that we are dealing with here are labor exploitation. We have especially unskilled laborers who either are in very hard conditions or are in conditions that essentially can be viewed as slavery or servitude. Sexual exploitation is also one of the most rampant forms of exploitation that we are facing here, especially in relation to younger girls and young women, ages between, say, 11 to 24, 25. There's a lot of sexual exploitation. We have something that we have categorized as child marriage, whereby the parents or a marriage is procured or arranged for a person who is below 18, which is wrong, but one of the unique things is so it has been happening so long, and perhaps society thinks or views it as commonplace or a norm. And that's one of the issues that we are really grappling with here, is to break those barriers and begin to expose the things that sort of have been embedded within the communities as normal, and yet actually they are exploitation of the worst type. For example, with domestic workers in Uganda, as a country or as a community, we rely a lot on domestic help. And so you'll find that every household at least has one domestic worker, or at one point in that household's life, there have been domestic workers. But the treatment of them sometimes amounts to servitude, forced labor, or unpaid labor altogether. There's a lot of debt bondage that happens within that setup, whereby, say, someone is working and their salary is held, their pay and wages are held by their employer, either as a means of control or as a means to ensure that they work to the capabilities of the employer or to the expectations of the employer. And so usually, again, because it's very young individuals who get into this kind of situation, they don't know any better. They don't know that, it is a right to have your wage paid on a regular basis and that you should be able to utilize or keep that money as you see fit. So many of them, and that's another problem because of how inbred some of these things are, victims don't even recognize that they are being exploited or that they are victims of exploitation until there has been some sort of sensitization done or somebody looking from outside into the situation identifies the problem and comes in to help. There's also a lot of exploitation when it comes to we've talked about sexual exploitation, differentiating it from matters like prostitution, where you have things like forced prostitution. We also have something quite peculiar or unique to our community, that is the forced begging. When you walk on the streets of Kampala, often you'll see very young children in very terrible looking circumstance begging on the road. And really what's happening is they have been placed there by employers or sort of managers to beg or collect money, which they remit to that employer. And these are usually children who are of school-going age, sometimes even way younger than the school-going age. And this is what they have been exposed to. This is what they've been forced to do. Another very peculiar form of exploitation is using parts of the body or a person in practices of witchcraft or occult practices. And this is something that happens mainly in semi-rural areas or urban areas, where usually, again, children are abducted or procured through other means, and then they are used as part of ritual practices. That is something that is very, very heartbreaking. Unfortunately, it is also something that is substantially common in that it has led to the enactment of an anti-human sacrifice act in Uganda. Yeah, so that is what we are dealing with generally. And one of the biggest issues that we have that makes this problem much bigger is, first of all, the fact that victims do not recognize that they are victims. Communities do not recognize that something wrong is being done. Often, for example, if a parent gives their child as a domestic worker to an aunt or an uncle, they don't see that as a problem. They see it as positioning the child perhaps to get food or to get a better life, and it is wrong. Many times the children do not get the needs that the children should be getting while they're in that situation, and that is very, very common. Also, the level of like community practices, things that have become so normal, it doesn't really faze anyone. Yes, it's bad, but everybody's, complicit, or it is very rampant in this area, and so there is not much that can be done about it. That kind of mindset is also one of the things that really sort of throws a spanner in the work. And so what we do is we try to sensitize every opportunity we get. We are creating awareness. We have a whole department that is dedicated to creating awareness within communities, within community leadership, and within other stakeholders. Also, as a space, there are a number of civil society organizations that are recognizing the importance of the work in this area and doing everything they can to try and bring this knowledge to the public.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So you mentioned you gave like an awesome overview um of all these very grave issues that need to be addressed locally. And it's a lot to deal with, quite certainly, but I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on maybe global issues and international gaps that tend to worsen these local problems or that tend to hinder the work that you're already doing?
Well, first thing that comes to mind when we talk about global issues is migration. Migrating, especially for labor or what we call greener pasture. It really has opened up a gap that facilitates human trafficking in so many ways. Of course, being as an industry, it is a very lucrative business for one to engage in that being a trafficker. And so the financial aspects of it are very, very attractive and often hard to turn down. And so with the closer we become globally, especially through technology or through innovation, the more or the bigger this problem becomes. It's so easy now for people, vulnerable people even, who do not have any form of sensitization to secure work abroad. And I mean, if you've lived outside your home country for a while, you know that it is not a very easy thing to be far from home. Getting help is often very, very difficult. And the risk of losing your status or your standing as a migrant often forces a person in distress not to seek help. And so I think as a country or as a global village, we need to do more to protect migrants that come into our jurisdiction. Yeah, it is something that is very, very bad. Many times you find unskilled labor, moving from one country to the other for work, but the promise at the point of recruiting, the promise is amazing. It's too good to be true. Opportunities that are available, they're really, really good. But then translating that opportunity into a real practical situation, completely different. Oftentimes you find that somebody traveled, say, to become a school teacher in country X and finds themselves, engrossed in a sex trafficking ring. And many times, because perhaps of how they traveled or what happened when they got there, following up on migrants and issues like that, it is not easy to trace this person and say, okay, what kind of social services do we avail to migrant workers? Are we able to track how they are faring in this country of ours? What are they up to? And that way, you find we have victims in our shelter who, for example, ended up in sex trafficking rings and have been there for over 6 years. And in those 6 years, family doesn't know where they are. The state hasn't really checked on them to know what's going on. Many times families don't even know whether the person is still alive or they passed on. So that we have become closer as internationally, but also sort of drifted apart, and everybody does what they're doing without regard for like their neighbor. And when I say everybody, I mean it is easy to get lost within the global village and not have anyone sort of be your keeper and try to look out for you. So I think we need to do more on that front. I also think globally, Yes, but there have been strides in that direction. I mean, we have the international protocols on human trafficking, smuggling of migrants, and how the protections that they offer towards the migrant. What is left is actually trying to get those protections or those international commitments implemented on a national, regional, or global level in uniformity, such that if we cannot, well, as we try to fight trafficking through all these other things, creating awareness, prosecution, financial intelligence, are we able to support victims such that more victims are able to step up and say, I'm having a similar problem? Many times, for example, especially when you're dealing with a migrant worker, if they are apprehended or if they are identified in a trafficking situation, often as the solution will be to detain and deport or to, charge them with crimes like overstay or staying without a permit or without a visa. And those really now put a lead on the anti-trafficking movement that we're trying to build momentum for. So I think globally we need to be more mindful of the needs of victims and put in place measures or steps that actually translate into physical useful help for the victims when they are identified. Yeah. We also have a lot of the economics, the global economic situation is very worrying, I must say. And whenever there is an economic crisis, then objective decision making is at risk. And therefore, we find more and more people in compromising situations or undue influence being held over them in the guise of, trying to sort out perhaps a community or a family's economic situation. Inflation is skyrocketing. So many parents aren't able to take care of their children. And so drastic measures have to be taken. And many times opportunities that are fronts for exploitation or trafficking then take the center stage. Usually when we're having these kinds of problems, inflation, recession, that is when the trafficker has the most opportunities. And so we need to be mindful of that. Even as we create awareness, we try to talk about, how to manage with the resources that you have so that the economic question is sort of answered. I know sometimes the situation is very, very dire, but I mean, we have to strike a balance somehow. Yeah.
So you mentioned about you mentioned all the needs that need to be addressed in order to actually attain justice for victims who are targeted by these traffickers, who are left to be the most vulnerable targets of trafficking. And once a survivor is victimized, there are all these difficulties in actually accessing sorry, I'm gonna cut this because I think our time is gonna run out soon, Monica.
Yeah.
It's okay, I'll cut this part of the live.
Okay.
But so um could you please walk sorry, now I'm distracted by the timer. So Monica, could you please walk us through how a survivor gets support from EverFree in terms of accessing justice and having enough space and resources for healing and care?
Okay, so we often are connected to a victim through a referral system. We work on referral basis, meaning either law enforcement or prosecution or any other stakeholder may identify a potential trafficking case within their space and call us in for assistance. We usually begin by doing what we call an initial assessment, where we determine the circumstances of this person. And in that assessment, we look out for, the indicators of trafficking, the indicators of trauma, and then after that, we have a participant enrolled onto the program. Once the participant is enrolled, then we do what we call a needs assessment and try to identify what are the needs of this person: immediate needs, intermediate needs, and long-term needs. And basing on that, we do what we call a beneficiary care plan. And what that looks at is sort of like a roadmap for meeting these needs. So immediate needs may be, for example, they have a mental illness or some sort of other mental, physical needs. Either they are wounded or injured and they need that medical attention. They perhaps need to be rescued from where they are. In that case, we would coordinate with, if the referral did not come, for example, from law enforcement, we would refer that bit to law enforcement for management, and we support law enforcement in doing this work as well. After we have done the needs assessment and we have mapped out, how we are going to move with this participant, we have told them what EverFree is and what we do and how, we offer help to those who need and accept it. And so then if, for example, a victim or a survivor does not have a safe place to stay, we do run an aftercare shelter. Well, shelters, we have 3 that house children and middle-aged teenagers, older children, and then adults. All our shelters serve female survivors. We do not have a shelter for males as yet, but we do have male participants on our program. So if the immediate need, for example, is physical protection or physical shelter, then we address that first by placing them in a shelter and having them, get acquainted to shelter living. If the participant or if the survivor has a safe place to stay, we assess the place that they think they are safe in. We cover things like, victim-centeredness, being trauma-informed, triggering issues of triggering traumas and those kinds of things. And then we help them integrate into that safe space. And that is when now the actual psychosocial support comes in. We begin to do counseling and therapies as the participant will need. Our work is very individualized, meaning we understand that every person comes with a different set of needs. So yes, we try to make sure that the support system around the victim is victim-centered and trauma-informed. That means basically that, we are consciously looking out for the needs of the victim and addressing them as they come along in a manner that best serves the victim. So that is the bulk of what we do. Once the survivor has reached a stage where we think they are rehabilitated or restored to, a certain extent, because many times this is a very long journey, we begin to embark on the empowerment part of the programming. And the intention for that is to ensure that the factors that led or that exposed this person to exploitation do not happen again. We are trying to prevent re-victimization with our empowerment program by, providing skilling, providing education, whatever they need in the circumstance to help them live an independent and meaningful life. That way, we are ensuring that they do not get back into the vicious cycle. When we began doing this work, we saw a lot of people who came in, received psychosocial support and the like, and then in about a year, when you're trying to follow up, you find that actually they have been sucked back into the trafficking world in one way or another. And so we thought it would be important for us to address those issues as well, both with the victim, but also within our programming to see that it doesn't happen again. So that is what that looks like. Along the way, we will provide, if, for example, it is a child, of course, the basic needs, including education, are met. If it is an adult, in whatever situation they've come in, we will support them as they come in with the needs that they have. We have a number of participants who have special needs, maybe sight impairment or physical impairment of one sort or another. We try to make sure we address those issues and also empower the family to continue with that support when the programming comes to an end, because our programming essentially is to restore, rehabilitate, and reintegrate. So the goal is that at one point in time, you will be able to stand on your own and, live in a community as a normal person. We try to make sure that this thing that has happened to you does not become, a stamp on your life, to try and put that chapter in the rearview mirror and allow or facilitate a person to focus on what lays ahead in the future, to plan and, aspire to do what they want to do, and be able to help them and encourage them to achieve those goals. So when we have a survivor who is within the community, we call that community-based care. Essentially, they will receive all the services that a person in the shelter will receive, except for residential facilities. Yeah. So we also have a survivors alliance, which is a safe space for survivors to come together and, talk about their journeys and talk about their aspirations and how we can do better in, making sure the services address the needs that they have. We try to make sure that our programming is survivor informed, and in that line, we do have a survivor advisory committee, which is made up of people who are participants in the program and have gone on to, thrive in the spaces that they have chosen to pursue. And so they come back to us to help us, make sure that what we are doing is actually relevant and feasible for the survivor. From that perspective, we try to ensure that everything we do, the survivor's lens or the survivor's perspective has been applied to it and it makes sense for the survivor. Yes.
That is so amazing. And I know that that component of being survivor centered and having the input of survivors also is quite central to the legal program, which is actually, as I mentioned, like my introduction to you and to EverFree a couple of years back. So could you tell us a bit about how survivors attain justice through EverFree's help? And a bit more about the legal program, and any other initiatives for policy and law.
Okay, so I hope we don't geek out here. So
Yeah,
let us talk about the law.
it's a bit of a
Yes,
broad
so
question. I'm sorry.
that's fine. So what we try to do when we get a participant enrolled into the program, They are assigned a case manager who is going to be their point person or their immediate support as they go through the program. So one of the things that is done during assessment and needs assessment is identifying whether the circumstances that are presenting have legal connotations to them. For example, do we need to report this to the police, especially if the referral came from somewhere else? If they're already from the police, then we need to ask ourselves, what is the police doing about this case? We work very, very closely with the law enforcement here to support investigations or to facilitate investigations in one way or another, and also prosecution of the cases. So once a need has been identified, our social workers, our case managers are trained on, indicators of ingredients of trafficking, for example, exploitation. What is the standard that would be applied to a situation for it to become legally defined as exploitation or trafficking in persons? And so when they identify that need, we do have a legal department which has a victim support officer and a legal officer. So they will bring that matter to that department, and then we will assess the situation from that perspective, sort of like reading a case file.
Right. Yeah.
And then we try to understand through a meeting with the survivor what they think justice would be for them. Again, very individualized, because we want to make sure that what we are doing falls in line with what the survivor wants to see. It also helps us manage expectations, because sometimes something has happened, and realistically speaking, if we are to get a positive verdict, judgment in our favor, the consequence may not be as big as you expect it to be. And so we try to manage expectations, talk to them about the legal process, what's possible, what's not possible, what their obligation will be if they move forward, and how we'll support them through the program, how long it will take, what will be required, how will it become public information, what concerns do they have about this process. And oftentimes you find that actually survivors are plagued with fear and uncertainty about the justice process. And so they really need this assistance. They need this aid to sort of hold their hand and walk them through the process, dealing with prosecutors, interviewers, interrogators. Again, because of the dynamics around trafficking, depending on how long someone has been in captivity, there may be a bloodline between, is this person a victim of trafficking or are they a perpetrator of, especially where traffickers sort of recruit or indoctrinate victims into supporting their venture. So navigating all that can be quite daunting for the victim. And so that's what the legal program is there for. So we do the legal representation and the intermediary work, also ensuring that the stakeholders who need to get into contact with this victim are victim-centered. For example, if you're dealing with someone who, because of their experience, perhaps is fearful of law enforcement, we will guide and advise police on how best they can interview, how best they can approach a survivor for the best possible outcome. Well, we're not trying to shield the survivor from the justice process, but rather to help them go through it in a manner that is dignifying for them and also empowering for them.
Wow.
Whether they win or lose, if they go through the process in the right way, they will still be empowered, because again, because of the nature of trafficking, many times you find that It began, for example, in Uganda, it moved to Tanzania, the exploitation was in South Africa or in Dubai or where. So questions of evidence, questions of cross-border investigations, all those things have to be addressed. Expert evidence, following money trails is not very easy. And so many times you will find that a case can become very, very problematic. And so oftentimes the victims suffer the most in this process because either they are considered as not telling the truth because they don't have all the pieces, or they are refusing to be helpful, things like that, because they're fearful. So we walk that journey with them as long as it takes. And even after the care plan has, reached its end, for example, someone is rehabilitated and they are happy and fine within the community. If the legal side of things hasn't yet been resolved, we will continue to support that process until we get to a logical conclusion. And we also ensure that the victim's voice is heard throughout all those processes. Sometimes we'll be lucky and we'll have someone admit their guilt at the early stages. And so we are beginning to do a plea bargain, but we want to make sure that the prosecutor, the investigator understands what the survivor would want to see. So we are sort of balancing off, what the outcome a prosecutor needs to achieve, what a police officer needs to achieve to have done a good job on that case, with what a victim wants to see for them to feel that justice has been served. Sometimes it may mean, yes, you have admitted guilt and you're willing to perhaps make a settlement, but you do not want jail time. And yet the survivor thinks jail time would be appropriate. That has to be taken into consideration. If we do not agree, then we have to take it to a judge and say, this is what the victim would like because of ABCDs, like a victim impact statement. And because of the work that we've done with prosecution, trainings and whatnot, they have begun to see, they now clearly see that voice is important for the work to be relevant. It doesn't do to have X number of convictions on the books and yet victims still feel dissatisfied with the process. Yeah, so that's what the legal process would look like briefly. And in terms of policy, the legal framework around trafficking basically revolves around the Anti-Trafficking Act that we are currently using. There are a few supporting acts. I mentioned the Human Sacrifice Act. We also have a couple of bills that are in process that would also affect this space. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have as a country is that our witness protection legal framework is still wanting. And it's an area that really, in order for us to be successful in this anti-trafficking movement, we need to have that firmly in place and implemented. Again, because of the lucrative nature of human trafficking, it makes speaking up against traffickers very, very dangerous for the victim and also for witnesses. It is very, very important that we have a framework that can protect them and, shield them from the backlash that is likely to arise from some of these things. We did handle a case, is that like 2018, where the witness protection question became central to the work that we were doing. And it is then that we actually realized that without a framework on this, it may be sort of like, how can I put this? Very little work done, because you cannot, encourage someone to speak up in a situation where their life will be at risk or where their families are going to be at risk. And yet, it is important that these people speak up if we want to solve the problem. So we are always calling upon government to try and, push this bill through. It does have a big financial implication because a witness protection program would be very expensive and very, very intricate, but it's something that must be done. And part of our advocacy work is around that, getting that done, or having the international commitments domesticated and ratified and codified into our laws. Yeah.
It really is so amazing that in all of those steps that you mentioned, this grueling process, like the legal process that victims have to go through, or even in the broader advocacy steps that are being pushed to are being are ideals for the benefit of survivors and victims' rights. It's amazing that a core focus of EverFree and the EverFree team in Uganda is to ensure that each step is trauma informed. And like you said, that I felt this was very powerful what you said, that victims are dignified and empowered throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
That is truly amazing to hear, and it kind of shows how very human and very crucial this work is, how this is concerned with the dignity of every every survivor. Um,
Mm.
and so thank you so much for that amazing overview. And thank you for your time today, Monica. And of course,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for your work, your tireless work every day. And for inspiring me to join Everfree. Thank you. And yeah, I'll see you in another meeting.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Krisha. And I think these live sessions are also a very good platform to get the message out there. We strongly believe that, especially in terms of human trafficking, knowledge is power. If you do not know what's happening around you, then most likely there could even be situations of exploitation right within, your space, and you haven't recognized it. Because when we embarked on the capacity building program for law enforcement and prosecution, what we saw was a drastic shoot up in the number of cases reported
Right.
as trafficking in persons. And it wasn't that, suddenly people are being trafficked everywhere. It was that now the law enforcer or the police officer was able to recognize a situation and classify it as trafficking. Yet ordinarily they would be saying it's a domestic dispute, go home and sort it out. Or, as families, you come to an agreement about this child marriage. They began to properly identify and classify cases as what they were, trafficking cases. And that shoot up in numbers, I think since 2018, where we reported roughly about 65, 70 cases of trafficking nationwide. We currently have about 600 cases reported. And so there is so much work being done around, making sure that everything is properly classified. We do have stakeholders coming up to us and consulting. They have found a situation that sort of looks like trafficking, but doesn't really. So what do we think about it? We have organizations like the Human Trafficking Institute that has done a tremendous job in, building up capacity of law enforcement and prosecution in this sector. And so what we have seen through that is that actually we have the tools with us to do something about trafficking. We just need to recognize it when we see it. And that's why I love this session so much. I know that we are reaching more and more people, and we're building curiosity for people to look into, what is happening around them and whether it can be classified as exploitation. And I think that is the key. At the end of the day, the communities are the biggest resource in identifying trafficking situations. Oftentimes, traffickers hide in plain sight. They are upstanding members of community. They are virtues in society. They are, pillars of virtue in their societies. But there is something else going on in the back that only someone, in that space would be able to identify. It's not like murder where you're going to find a dead body somewhere. No, this is it's quite different, and that makes it very, very difficult to identify and to to tackle the problem. So yes, we're always calling out just always calling upon communities to do their bit and be curious. If you see something, say something. That's all that is required of a community member, by the way, just to ask the question, and everything else will flow from that. Yeah. So
Yes,
thank
that
you very much
is.
for having me.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That everything you just said, it's just so imperative, and it's also a perfect summary of what we're learning in these lives is how through every step, like there must be steps taken towards prevention and awareness, being trauma informed, and you're training first responders to be trauma informed, to know the signs. You're helping communities know the signs and prevent trafficking. You're helping victims and survivors throughout every step of the way towards justice and healing, and for everybody globally to be aware because people might be trafficked without even knowing it. Like I know that's very common in labor trafficking, especially where they're not even aware that what is happening to them is trafficking and exploitation. Um, and of course, throughout these lives, we will also be having other talks surveying the nature of trafficking in other parts of the world and in other communities, and steps that all of our supporters and participants can take towards prevention and to be advocates in their own way as well. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and please continue to tune in during our lunchtime lives. All of these lives will be available for viewing in case you missed it, or if you'd just like to look back and geek out with me and Monica about all of these nuances in EverFree's work. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.